"You are only suited for the background," my mother shouted, favoring my sister. For 11 years, I secretly built our family's foundation while they took the credit. The day I quietly resigned and walked out, they laughed. 6 months later, their empire began to crumble because... I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Rachael Monroe. I'm 34 years old, and for most of my adult life, I believed that doing good work was more important than getting credit for it. Looking back now, I realize how easy it is to confuse being appreciated with simply being useful. For 11 years, I worked at my family's education foundation. If you asked people in our community who ran the organization, almost everyone would have answered the same way. My goodness, Evelyn Monroe does incredible work. My mother loved hearing that. She was the public face of the foundation. She attended charity dinners, posed for newspaper photos, and accepted community awards with the kind of confidence people naturally admired. Then there was my younger sister, Chloe. She had endless energy, a warm smile, and a talent for making people feel important. She greeted donors by name, spoke at fundraising galas, and somehow always looked comfortable standing behind a microphone. And then there was me. Most people never noticed I was in the room. Honestly, that never bothered me in the beginning. Someone had to keep everything running. Every weekday started the same way. I unlocked the office before anyone else arrived, poured myself a cup of coffee, and opened an inbox that was already full. A school district needed changes to a scholarship agreement. A board member had questions about next quarter's budget. One of our grant applications needed revisions before the deadline. By lunchtime, I'd usually solved problems most people never even knew existed. I wasn't just managing paperwork. I built relationships. I knew which donors preferred phone calls instead of emails. I remembered birthdays, family updates, and which causes mattered most to each of them. Some donors would call the office and say, "Is Rachael available?" Not because I had the biggest title, because they trusted me. One afternoon, I met with Mr. Harrison, a businessman who had supported our scholarship program for years. After reviewing our plans for the next school year, he smiled and shook my hand. "I always leave these meetings feeling confident the money is going exactly where it should." "That's what we're working toward," I told him. As he gathered his briefcase, he added, "Tell your mother she's doing an amazing job." I smiled. "I will?" And I did. I never corrected anyone. Not him, not reporters, not local officials who congratulated my mother at fundraising events. I told myself the mission mattered more than the recognition. Maybe I believed that because it made the sacrifices easier to accept. Inside the office, everyone knew how things really worked. Whenever a deadline became impossible, someone would appear outside my office. "Rachael, do you have 5 minutes?" It was almost never just 5 minutes. Sometimes it was a finance question. Sometimes it was a donor issue. Sometimes it was a problem a donor issue. Sometimes it was a problem nobody wanted to bring to my mother because they knew she'd simply ask me to handle it anyway. Even our executive director often leaned into my doorway. "I know you're busy," he'd say, "but I don't know who else can fix this." I usually laughed, "Leave it with me." And somehow it always got done. The funny thing is, I didn't resent it. Not then. I believed we were all working toward the same purpose. Helping students attend college felt meaningful enough to justify the long hours. At home, our conversations rarely centered on my work. Mom usually wanted updates about upcoming galas, donor receptions, or board dinners. Chloe would stop by my office before a speech and ask, "Can you read this one more time?" I want it to sound natural. I'd make a few edits, hand the pages back, and she'd grin. "You're the best." Those little moments convinced me we were a team. Different roles. Same mission. Then one Sunday evening, Mom invited everyone to dinner at her house. Nothing unusual. When Ethan and I arrived, Chloe was already there, practically glowing with excitement. Mom carried dinner to the table wearing the same expression she always had when she was about to share good news. She waited until everyone had finished eating before setting down her glass. "I've been waiting for the right time to tell all of you this," she said, smiling at Chloe. She reached over and squeezed my sister's hand. "I think it's time for Chloe to take on a much bigger public role in the foundation." The congratulations started almost immediately. Dad raised his glass first. "That's wonderful, sweetheart." Ethan smiled politely beside me, and I did the same. Chloe looked genuinely surprised but also excited. "Really?" she asked. "You think I'm ready?" Mom nodded without hesitation. "I know you are." The rest of dinner turned into a conversation about upcoming charity events, community breakfasts, ribbon cuttings, and local interviews. Mom was already talking about newspaper features and who should introduce Chloe at the next fundraising gala. I listened more than I talked. It wasn't that I disagreed. At the time, I actually thought Chloe would do well. She connected with people naturally, and our foundation needed someone comfortable in front of large audiences. I figured I'd simply keep doing what I had always done behind the scenes. For a while, that's exactly how it worked. Except Chloe's calendar became fuller. Mine became heavier. Every speech she gave started on my laptop. She'd walk into my office carrying a notebook and a cup of coffee. "I have to speak for 15 minutes next Thursday," she'd say. "Can you help me organize my thoughts?" I'd grin. "Leave it with me." She trusted me to make everything clearer. I'd spend hours gathering data and turning research into something people could actually connect with. Then I'd email the finished speech to Chloe. She'd deliver it like every word had come naturally to her. She was good at that. Better than I ever would have been. At the gala, people stood and applauded. One board member leaned toward me during dessert. "Your sister has a real gift." "She does," I answered. "That speech was incredible," he said. I smiled into my coffee. "I'm glad you liked it." He had no idea I'd written every line. Neither did anyone else. That became our routine. The more visible Chloe became, the more invisible my work seemed. It happened so gradually that I almost missed it. Reporters called asking for interviews with Chloe. Community groups requested Chloe as a guest speaker. Even when they needed financial reports or program updates, they usually addressed the email to her. She'd simply forward everything to me with one message. "Can you handle this?" I always could. One afternoon, we wrapped up another donor luncheon. As guests were leaving, several people stopped to congratulate Chloe. "You were wonderful. Inspiring speech. We're increasing our donation next year." She thanked every volunteer who helped decorate the ballroom. She thanked the catering manager. She even thanked the college student who ran the slideshow. Then she hugged everyone goodbye and walked toward the parking lot. I stood inside collecting folders when one of our volunteers looked at me. "Were you involved in putting all this together?" I laughed softly. "A little." She smiled. "Well, whoever organized today deserves a vacation." That comment stayed with me because she had almost recognized my work. Later that evening, Chloe called while driving home. "Hey," she said cheerfully, "today's event went really well." It did. "I've already been invited to another luncheon next month." "That's great." "Oh, and thanks for sending those talking points yesterday. They helped." Before I could answer, another call came through. "I've gotta go. Love you." "Love you too." The line went dead. It wasn't rude. It was normal. That was the strange part. Nobody in my family intentionally ignored me. They had simply gotten used to the idea that if something needed to be done, Rachael would take care of it. No applause required. Even inside the office, people started introducing Chloe as the driving force behind the foundation's recent success. I never corrected them. I just kept working. But I noticed something changing inside me. Whenever another article appeared with Chloe's picture on the front page, I didn't feel jealous. I felt distant, like I was quietly maintaining the machinery while everyone else admired the finished building. Ethan picked up on it before anyone else. One evening, he found me answering emails after dinner. "You're still working?" "Just finishing one thing." "You've been saying that for 3 hours." I smiled. "It's scholarship season?" He nodded. "You know," he said carefully, "it's okay if people know how much you actually do." I shrugged. "The work gets done. That's what matters." He looked at me for a moment, then dropped it. A few days later, my phone rang while I was organizing donor files. "Mom." Her voice sounded unusually excited. "Rachel, are you busy?" "I can make time." "Good," she said. "I need your help with something." "What is it?" She paused just long enough to make me curious. "I think we've been given a really big opportunity for this family." Mom rarely sounded that excited unless she had already made up her mind. "What kind of opportunity?" I asked. "You'll see this weekend," she said. "I want everyone there." She wouldn't explain anything else. By Saturday afternoon, the 4 of us were sitting around the conference table at the foundation instead of our dining room. Chloe looked nervous. Mom looked proud. Dad leaned back in his chair. "Well," he said, "I think we've all waited long enough." Mom smiled at Chloe. "Go ahead." Chloe took a deep breath. "I've decided to run for city council." For a second, the room was completely quiet. Then Dad started clapping. Ethan congratulated her. I smiled too. "That's a big decision." "It is," Chloe admitted. "But I really think I can make a difference." And honestly, I believed she meant that. She had always cared about education and community programs. Running for office wasn't completely out of character. Mom immediately shifted into planning mode. "This foundation has introduced you to so many community leaders already," she said. "People know your face. They trust you." She turned toward me. "Rachel, you'll help coordinate everything." I blinked. "Coordinate what?" "The schedules, background materials, community outreach. You know how to organize these things better than anyone." I nodded automatically. "Sure." At first, nothing seemed unusual. Campaign meetings were held after office hours. Volunteers came and went. People talked about polling numbers over coffee. Life simply became a little busier. Then small changes started creeping into the foundation. Donors I'd known for years began receiving invitations that had nothing to do with scholarships. Community partners asked whether they should RSVP to campaign receptions instead of education events. Even some board members casually mentioned Chloe's campaign before discussing foundation business. The lines were starting to blur. One morning, I was updating donor records when Martha, one of our longtime volunteers, quietly stepped into my office. She closed the door behind her. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." She lowered her voice. "Is it appropriate for us to be inviting foundation donors to campaign events?" I hesitated. "I don't know exactly how everything's being handled." She nodded slowly. "I just didn't want people thinking we're mixing the two." "I understand." She thanked me and left. A few minutes later, I realized she hadn't really been asking for an answer. She'd been asking if someone else was worried too. She wasn't the only one. Over the next couple of weeks, similar conversations kept happening. One staff member wondered why campaign meetings were using foundation conference rooms. Another quietly asked whether donor mailing lists were supposed to be shared. Nobody accused anyone of doing anything illegal. They just sounded uncomfortable. Whenever those questions reached Mom, she brushed them aside. "We're supporting Chloe as a family," she'd say. "People are reading too much into this." Nobody argued, including me. I kept telling myself there was probably a reasonable explanation for everything. Besides, Chloe never acted demanding. If anything, she looked overwhelmed. One afternoon, she stopped by my office carrying 2 folders. "I feel like I'm juggling 10 things at once," she admitted with a tired laugh. You kind of are. I couldn't do this without you. She smiled before hurrying off to another meeting. That conversation stuck with me. Chloe wasn't trying to take advantage of me. She genuinely believed we were all pulling in the same direction, which somehow made everything more complicated. Even Ethan noticed the extra hours. You're working weekends again, he said one evening, only until things settle down. He raised an eyebrow. You've been saying that for years. I laughed it off, but his words lingered. A few days later, Mom asked me to review several planning documents before an upcoming campaign committee meeting. Just make sure everything looks organized, she said. I carried the folder back to my office and started reading through it. Volunteer assignments, venue contracts, advertising estimates, printing costs. Everything looked expensive, but not shocking. Then I turned another page. At the bottom was the projected campaign budget. I read the total once. Then I looked again to make sure I hadn't misplaced a decimal. The number was far higher than I had expected. I read the total once. Then I read it again. Nearly $150,000 for a local city council campaign. I flipped back through the pages thinking maybe I had missed something. Advertising, event venues, direct mail, consulting fees, fundraising dinners. Line after line added up to a number that didn't sit right with me. It wasn't only the amount, it was the names. Many of the proposed fundraising hosts were people I had known for years through the foundation. Donors, school partners, community leaders, relationships I had spent over a decade building one conversation at a time. I closed the folder and walked down the hall toward Mom's office. She looked up from her desk. What do you think? I set the folder in front of her. I have a question. Go ahead. Are we planning to ask foundation donors to support Chloe's campaign? Mom didn't seem surprised. We're inviting people who already know our family. I know, I said carefully, but most of those relationships came through the foundation. She leaned back. And? I just don't want people feeling like they have to support both. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Mom smiled. Not warmly, patiently, as if she were explaining something obvious. Rachel, these people trust us. They trust the foundation. They trust our family because of the foundation. There was a difference. At least, there was to me. I tried again. I'm worried about how this could look. Mom folded her hands on the desk. You're overthinking it. Maybe I was. I wanted to believe I was. So I let the conversation end there. But the uncomfortable feeling didn't leave. Over the next week, I noticed things I probably would have ignored before. Campaign invitations were being discussed during foundation meetings. Donor lists appeared alongside campaign planning notes. People started asking me which contributors might be willing to host fundraising events. Every answer felt a little harder to give. One afternoon, Chloe stopped by my office. She dropped into the chair across from my desk and rubbed her forehead. I feel like everybody wants something from me. I smiled. That's politics. She laughed. I guess. Then she looked at me. You don't think I'm making a mistake, do you? The question caught me off guard. No, I answered honestly. I think you really want to help people. She relaxed. Good. I was worried you were upset. I'm not upset. That wasn't entirely true, but I wasn't upset with Chloe. Not yet. She thanked me, grabbed another stack of campaign notes, and hurried out. Watching her leave, I realized something. She trusted that I would always be behind her. She never stopped to wonder whether anyone was standing behind me. The campaign kept growing. More dinners, more meetings, more phone calls. Some evenings I found myself answering campaign questions before I even finished foundation work. Ethan noticed it almost immediately. You've basically picked up a second full-time job. I know. Are you getting paid for any of it? I laughed. You already know the answer. He smiled, but it faded quickly. I just don't want to see you carrying everyone else's weight forever. I changed the subject. It felt easier than admitting he might have a point. A few days later, Mom asked if I could stay after a board meeting. Once everyone else left, she closed the conference room door. I've noticed you've been hesitant lately. I'm just trying to make sure we're protecting the foundation. And I appreciate that. She paused before continuing. But you need to look at the bigger picture. I waited. Chloe has the potential to become someone important. There was genuine pride in her voice. Then she looked directly at me. You've always been better behind the scenes. She said it so casually, like she thought it was a compliment, like she couldn't imagine those words landing any other way. I forced a small smile because I honestly didn't know what else to do. If that's how you see it? It is, she replied. Every successful family needs someone like you. Someone like you. Not someone to celebrate. Someone to support everyone else. I left her office carrying the same folder I'd walked in with. Only now it felt heavier. That evening, I drove home in complete silence. When I parked in the driveway, my work laptop was sitting on the passenger seat like it always did. Normally, I'd carry it inside, answer another round of emails, and finish whatever still needed finishing before bed. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I locked the car and walked into the house without it. I left my laptop in the car that night. It sounds like such a small thing. Most people probably wouldn't think twice about it. For me, it felt almost wrong. Around 9 o'clock, I caught myself reaching for my phone to check work emails. Then I remembered the laptop was still outside. I stood by the kitchen window for a moment, staring at my car. Nothing terrible happened. No emergency calls, no frantic messages. The foundation somehow survived one evening without me. Ethan noticed before I said a word. You okay? I think so. You've looked exhausted for weeks. I gave him the automatic answer. It's just a busy season. He smiled. Rachel, every season is your busy season. I couldn't argue with that. Instead, I poured myself another cup of tea and sat across from him. Neither of us spoke for a minute. The silence wasn't awkward, it was comfortable. Finally, he asked, Can I ask you something? Sure. When was the last time you actually took a vacation? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I started counting backward in my head. There had been conference trips, but those were work. Board retreats, but those were definitely work. Weekend donor events, fundraisers, scholarship interviews, community fairs. Every trip I could remember somehow involved the foundation. I laughed quietly. I honestly don't know. Ethan didn't look surprised. I thought that might be the answer. The realization hit harder than I expected. 11 years. I had spent 11 years planning everyone else's schedules so carefully that I had completely stopped planning my own life. The next morning, I drove to work as usual. The building looked exactly the same. The phones rang. People hurried through the hallways carrying folders. Someone waved and asked if I had time to review another grant proposal. Normally, I would have said yes immediately. This time, I answered differently. I can look at it this afternoon. The employee blinked. Oh, okay. It wasn't a dramatic moment, but it felt strange. I had never made someone wait before. Over the next few days, I started noticing little things I had ignored for years. Whenever a problem came up, everyone instinctively turned toward me. If a donor changed plans, they called me. If a deadline moved, they came to my office. If the copier jammed badly enough, somehow that became my problem too. It wasn't because those jobs belonged to me. People simply assumed I'd figure them out. And I always had. One afternoon, I caught my reflection in the dark computer screen after finishing another budget report. I looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, the kind that quietly builds over years until you stop recognizing it. That evening, Ethan suggested we go for a walk before dinner. We wandered through our neighborhood without talking much. Families were outside with their kids. A couple was teaching their daughter to ride a bike. Someone across the street was grilling hamburgers. It felt normal, almost unfamiliar. "You know what I realized?" I said. "What?" "I know more about some of our donors' families than I know about our neighbors." He looked at me. "That's a pretty lonely way to live." I nodded. I think somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that sacrificing everything was just part of being loyal. Loyal to who? I didn't answer right away. "The foundation." He smiled gently. "That's not what I asked." I stopped walking. For the first time, I said the words out loud. "I don't think my family really sees me anymore." Ethan didn't rush to respond. He simply reached for my hand. "I've been waiting for you to say that." I looked down. I kept telling myself it didn't matter who got the credit. But now. I exhaled slowly. "I'm not even sure they know what I actually do." He squeezed my hand. "I think they know." "You do?" "I think they've gotten used to believing you'll always be there." That sentence stayed with me all the way home. Later that night, I opened my laptop to finish one last report. Before I started typing, Ethan walked into my office doorway. He leaned against the frame with his arms crossed. "You've spent 11 years fixing everyone else's organization." I looked up. "I guess I have." He smiled. Then he asked one simple question. "What if you stopped fixing everyone else's organization and built your own?" I didn't answer Ethan right away. Not because I thought it was a bad idea, because it sounded impossible. The foundation had been part of my life for 11 years. I knew every program, every deadline, every board member, and almost every donor by heart. Leaving didn't feel like changing jobs. It felt like walking away from a piece of my identity. For the next couple of weeks, I kept going to work exactly as I always had. I answered emails, reviewed grant proposals, fixed budgets, solved last-minute problems before anyone else even knew they existed. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. Instead of asking myself how to make the foundation stronger, I caught myself asking a different question. If I weren't here tomorrow, would anyone even know where to start? The answer bothered me, not because I thought I was irreplaceable, because I had allowed too much knowledge to stay inside my own head. So I started changing that. I created step-by-step guides for every recurring task. I organized years of digital files that only made sense to me. I updated donor records with detailed notes, meeting histories, and communication preferences. I even wrote instructions for the little things people never noticed: how scholarship interviews were scheduled, which reports had to be submitted first, which grant deadlines could never be moved. Every evening, another document went into a shared folder. One afternoon, our executive director stopped by my office. "You've been documenting everything lately." I smiled. "I figured it was overdue." He nodded. "Honestly, this will help everyone." "I hope so." He thanked me and walked away without asking another question. Nobody did. Mom noticed the folders too. "Getting organized?" she asked while flipping through one of the binders. "I've been meaning to clean up our systems." "Good." She closed it without looking any further. To her, it was just another example of me being efficient. Chloe had the same reaction. She stopped by my office carrying campaign flyers. "I saw all those manuals you're putting together. They'll make things easier." She laughed. "You always think of everything." Then she hugged me and hurried off to another interview. I watched her leave. For the first time, I wondered what she'd think if she knew why I was writing those manuals. At home, Ethan noticed the stack of notebooks growing on our dining room table. "You've made enough documentation to train a small army." I laughed. "That's kind of the point." He looked at me carefully. So, you've made a decision. I looked down at the checklist in front of me. Almost every box had been marked complete. I think I have. He didn't celebrate. He didn't try to convince me one last time. He simply reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you. A few days later, I typed a resignation letter. It wasn't dramatic. Just one page. I thanked the board for the opportunity to serve. I explained that I would stay long enough to ensure a smooth transition. Then I printed it, signed my name, and slipped it into an envelope. Mom read it twice. She looked more confused than upset. Are you serious? I am. She frowned. Is someone recruiting you? No. Are you burned out? I smiled politely. I think it's just time. She exchanged a quick glance with Chloe. Neither of them argued. Neither of them asked me to stay. Mom simply nodded. Well, thank you for making the transition easy. That was all. No long conversation, no questions about why, no curiosity about what I planned to do next. Everyone seemed to assume I'd eventually find another administrative position somewhere else. Over the following week, I finished every remaining task on my list. I introduced staff members to contacts they had never spoken with directly. I handed over passwords, explained reporting schedules, reviewed active grants one final time. On my last afternoon, I walked into Mom's office carrying my company laptop and office key. She looked up from her paperwork. Everything wrapped up? Yes. I placed the laptop on her desk. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then I gave her a small smile. I think it's time someone else handles this. Mom looked at the laptop for a second, then back at me. If you're sure. I am. She gave a small nod. Well, I wish you the best. That was it. No hug, no long conversation. No one asked if I had changed my mind. I walked out of the building carrying one small box with a framed photo, a coffee mug, and a notebook I'd kept since my first year at the foundation. 11 years fit into one cardboard box. I expected to feel devastated. Instead, I felt strangely light. The following Monday was the first weekday in more than a decade that I didn't drive to the foundation. I woke up before my alarm anyway. For a moment, I panicked, convinced I'd forgotten a board meeting or a grant deadline. Then I remembered. There wasn't one. Ethan was already making coffee. He smiled when he saw me standing in the kitchen. So, I replied, smiling back. What do you want to do today? It sounded like such a simple question. I honestly didn't know. For years, every hour of my day had belonged to someone else. Now the schedule was empty. It was exciting and terrifying. Over breakfast, Ethan opened his laptop. I've been thinking about something. That's usually dangerous. He laughed. Hear me out. He pulled up a rough business plan he'd been putting together. His background was software development. Mine was nonprofit operations. What if we combined both? He asked. Organizations need better systems. You've spent years solving problems most nonprofits don't even realize they have. I studied the notes on his screen. Grant management, board governance, donor databases, workflow systems, strategic planning. It wasn't a random idea. It was everything I'd been doing for 11 years, except this time, people would actually hire me to do it. We spent the next few weeks turning that idea into a real business. We rented a small office with barely enough room for 2 desks. Ethan handled the technology. I built our consulting services from scratch. For the first time in years, I was creating something that belonged to us. There were no newspaper photographers, no ribbon cuttings, no speeches, just 2 people trying to build an honest business. I'll admit it. I was nervous. Leaving a stable position was one thing. Starting over at 34 was something else entirely. One afternoon, while I was still designing our website, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a name I hadn't seen in months. Mr. Harrison, one of the foundation's longtime donors. I smiled before answering. Hi, Richard. I heard you left. I did. There was a brief pause. I was wondering if the rumors were true. What rumors? That you're starting your own consulting firm. I looked across the room at Ethan. They're true. Richard chuckled. Good. That wasn't the response I expected. My family's nonprofit has been struggling with its scholarship program, he continued. I was actually hoping you'd be willing to help us. You mean, as a consultant? Exactly. I blinked. We haven't even officially launched yet. I know. So why call us? His answer stayed with me for a long time. Because every time I needed something done right, you were the person who made it happen. When I hung up, Ethan looked at me. Our first client? I smiled wider than I had in months. Our first client. Things moved faster after that. Richard introduced us to another nonprofit director. That director recommended us to someone else. We weren't spending money on advertising. We didn't have to. The relationships I'd built over the years quietly opened doors on their own. Meanwhile, life at home became peaceful. We ate dinner without checking emails every 5 minutes. We took walks after work. Sometimes we even stopped working before sunset. I hadn't realized how unusual that felt. Every now and then, Mom would call, mostly to talk about Chloe's campaign. She never asked much about the business. When I mentioned we'd signed another client, she sounded polite, but distracted. Well, that's nice, she said. I'm sure it's good experience. Experience. As if I'd just started my career. Chloe wasn't dismissive. She simply assumed my consulting work was temporary. I'm sure once things calm down, you'll find another foundation to run, she told me one afternoon. I smiled. I guess we'll see. Neither of them seemed worried that I'd left. If anything, they acted as though the foundation had barely noticed. 6 months passed. Our client list kept growing. One Tuesday morning, while I was preparing for a strategy meeting, my phone buzzed. The caller ID stopped me cold. It was someone from the foundation. I answered. Hello? The voice on the other end sounded unusually tense. Rachel, do you have a few minutes? I recognized the voice immediately. It was Linda, our former finance coordinator. She sounded unusually hesitant. Of course. What's going on? She let out a quiet sigh. I wasn't sure if I should even call. Is everything okay? There was a pause. We're having a few challenges. I waited. The annual report is running behind. That surprised me. The report was almost never late. For 11 years, I had treated that deadline like it was carved in stone. What kind of delays? I asked. We're still trying to gather information from different departments. I nodded to myself. The reporting system had always depended on dozens of small pieces coming together in the right order. Once you understood the process, it wasn't complicated. Until then, it looked like chaos. Linda cleared her throat. I wasn't calling to ask you to come back. I appreciate that. I just wanted to tell you, I finally understand why you always seemed so busy. I smiled quietly. Thank you. She laughed softly. I honestly thought you just liked being involved in everything. I've heard that before. No, she said. You were holding everything together. We talked for another minute before hanging up. I stared at my phone for a while. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't anyone asking me to fix things. It was simply acknowledgement. Oddly enough, that meant more than I expected. Life at our consulting firm kept moving forward. Our second client referred us to a third. A regional education nonprofit hired us to redesign their grant tracking system. Another organization needed help preparing for a board transition. For the first time in my career, I was solving problems for people who openly appreciated the work. One executive director stopped me after a meeting. "I don't know how you untangled all of this." I laughed. "I've had a lot of practice." She smiled. "Whatever you're charging, it's worth it." I wasn't used to hearing things like that. Back at the foundation, things continued shifting, not collapsing, just becoming harder. A longtime donor postponed his annual contribution. He wanted additional financial projections before making a commitment. That wasn't unusual by itself, but a week later, another major donor asked for similar information. Then one of the corporate sponsors requested a detailed impact report before renewing its partnership. Questions that I used to answer almost automatically were now piling up on someone else's desk. Chloe called one evening. She sounded exhausted. "Have you ever had one of those days where everybody needs something different?" I smiled. "I've had a few." She laughed weakly. "I don't know how you used to keep all these projects straight." I almost answered. Instead, I simply said, "You'll figure it out." She thanked me. Neither of us mentioned the foundation again. A few days later, Mom left me a voicemail. Nothing dramatic. She wanted to know whether I remembered the contact information for one of our older scholarship sponsors. I still had it memorized. For a second, I almost called her back immediately. Then I stopped myself. I'd left detailed records. If the information wasn't easy to find, that wasn't because I had hidden it. It meant someone needed to learn the system. I texted instead. "Everything should be in the donor database under sponsor history." She replied with a simple thumbs up. That was the end of the conversation. Keeping those boundaries wasn't easy. Part of me still wanted to solve every problem the moment I heard about it. Old habits don't disappear overnight. Ethan noticed me staring at my phone after Mom's message. "You wanted to jump in, didn't you?" "A little, but you didn't." I shook my head. "They have everything they need." He smiled. "And that's an important difference." The weeks kept passing. More former coworkers reached out, not asking for favors, just talking. One invited me to lunch. Another admitted she never realized how many responsibilities I'd quietly absorbed over the years. "I used to think 3 people were sharing your workload," one of them confessed. "Turns out, it was mostly you." Hearing that brought a strange mix of emotions. I wasn't happy they were struggling, but it was comforting to know I hadn't imagined the weight I'd been carrying. Toward the end of summer, Linda called again. This time, she skipped the small talk. "The auditors arrived this morning." I sat back in my chair. "Already?" She sighed. "Yeah." There was another brief silence. Then she said something that made my stomach tighten. "I have a feeling this year's audit is going to look very different from all the others." I have a feeling this year's audit is going to look very different from all the others. Linda's words stayed with me for the rest of the day. I knew exactly how much preparation went into every annual audit. For years, I had quietly spent weeks reviewing files before the auditors ever walked through the door. I checked missing signatures, corrected coding errors, matched receipts, updated grant documentation. Most people never knew those little problems had existed because I fixed them before they became anyone else's problem. This time, they would see everything exactly as it was. Even so, I didn't call. I didn't offer advice. The foundation wasn't mine anymore. Instead, I focused on the people sitting in front of me. Our consulting business had grown far beyond what Ethan and I imagined 6 months earlier. We had started with 1 borrowed conference table and 2 laptops. Now our calendar was booked nearly every week. A statewide literacy nonprofit hired us to reorganize its operations after years of rapid growth. Another education foundation brought us in to prepare for a major accreditation review. The strange part wasn't getting the work. It was hearing the same sentence over and over. "We've heard you're the person who knows how to build systems that actually last." Nobody introduced me as Evelyn's daughter. Nobody cared where I had worked before. They cared whether I could solve their problems. For the first time in my professional life, my reputation belonged to me. One afternoon, Ethan walked into my office carrying a printed contract. "You should look at this." I took the papers from him. A national nonprofit network wanted us to oversee operational improvements for several of its member organizations. It was, by far, the biggest contract we'd ever been offered. I looked at the number twice. Then I looked at Ethan. "Is this real?" He grinned. I called them to make sure. I laughed. "I can't believe this. You earned it." Not, "We got lucky." Not, "Someone gave us a chance." You earned it. Those 3 words meant more than I expected. A few days later, Linda called again. This time, she sounded exhausted. "The audit's finished." I waited. "They found several administrative issues." "What kind of issues?" "Documentation gaps, missing follow-up records, grant files that should have been updated months ago." None of it sounded dramatic. None of it involved fraud or stolen money. It was something much quieter. The kind of operational problems that slowly damage an organization's credibility. Linda sighed. The auditors kept asking why these issues had never shown up before. I didn't answer, because I already knew. For 11 years they had shown up. I had simply caught them before anyone else ever saw them. Linda continued. "I don't think anyone realized how much you were fixing behind the scenes." Neither did I. Not completely. News traveled slowly through the nonprofit community. I heard that one longtime donor decided to postpone renewing a major gift until the foundation completed its corrective action plan. Another sponsor requested additional oversight reports before approving next year's funding. Nobody was abandoning the organization, but confidence was beginning to slip. Meanwhile, our clients kept recommending us to others. Sometimes I caught myself smiling during meetings, not because the foundation was struggling. I never wanted that. I smiled because I had finally stopped measuring my worth by someone else's recognition. One Friday evening, Ethan found me cleaning out an old storage box in our home office. Inside were notebooks from my years at the foundation, calendars, grant drafts, board meeting agendas, handwritten donor notes, boxes full of my career. He picked up one notebook and flipped through it. "You kept everything." "I guess I did." He smiled. "Do you miss it?" I thought about the question for a long moment. I miss the mission. But not the role? I slowly shook my head. No. Later that night, after Ethan went to bed, I stayed in the office surrounded by those old files. An idea suddenly crossed my mind. Out of curiosity, I opened my laptop and searched for the average consulting rates for nonprofit operational management. I grabbed a calculator. Then I started estimating. Board preparation, grant management, strategic planning, donor relations, audit readiness, crisis management, year after year, project after project, hour after hour. The total kept climbing. I stopped typing for a second, then entered another number. The final total appeared on the screen. I just stared at it in silence. I just stared at the number on my screen. $412,000. I checked the math again. Then a third time. It wasn't exact, of course. Some years I had worked more than others. Some projects would have been billed differently. But even with conservative estimates, the total stayed above $400,000. I leaned back in my chair and covered my face with both hands. To my surprise, I started crying. Not because of the money. I had never expected my family to pay me consulting rates. That wasn't the point. The number represented something much bigger. 11 years. 11 years of solving crises before anyone noticed. Working weekends, skipping vacations, answering late-night phone calls, writing speeches that carried someone else's name, building donor relationships that strengthened someone else's reputation. For the first time, I could actually measure what I had given away. Ethan walked into the office just as I was wiping my eyes. He looked at the calculator, then at me. "You figured it out?" I nodded. It was more than $400,000. He glanced at the screen, then he quietly pulled up another chair. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally he said, "You know what I see?" "What?" "I don't see $400,000. I looked over. "I see proof that you've always been valuable." That sentence settled somewhere deep inside me. For years I'd been waiting for someone in my family to tell me that. Instead, the person who loved me had been saying it all along. Life kept moving, and so did our company. 1 year became 2. 2 became 3. Before I realized it, 5 years had passed. The little office Ethan and I had rented was long gone. We had a real team now: consultants, project managers, operations specialists. Organizations from several states trusted us to redesign systems, improve governance, and prepare for major audits. Sometimes I'd walk through our office and hear people discussing solutions I'd once carried alone. Now there were entire teams working together. It still amazed me. The best part wasn't the growth. It was the culture. Whenever someone stayed late to solve a difficult problem, we noticed. When a project succeeded, everyone who contributed received credit. I had built the kind of workplace I once wished existed. One afternoon, my assistant walked into my office holding an envelope. "This arrived for you." I opened it without thinking. Halfway through reading the first page, I stopped. "What is it?" Ethan asked. I handed him the letter. He smiled almost immediately. "They want you to give the keynote?" I laughed in disbelief. The National Philanthropy Leadership Conference, one of the largest nonprofit conferences in the country. They wanted me to open the event with a keynote address about organizational leadership, transparency, and supporting the people behind the scenes. For a second, I remembered all the speeches I'd written over the years. Back then, someone else had stood under the lights while I watched from the audience. This time, the invitation had my name on it. No family title. No shared credit. Just mine. Preparing the speech felt different from anything I'd done before. I wasn't trying to make someone else sound inspiring. I was simply telling the truth about leadership. That strong organizations aren't built by the loudest voices. They're built by people whose work often goes unnoticed. A week before the conference, the organizers emailed all the speakers with the final attendee list. Mostly, I skimmed it out of curiosity. Universities, community foundations, national charities, corporate sponsors. Then my eyes stopped on one line. I read it twice, then a third time. Registered attendee, Monroe Foundation. For several seconds, I couldn't look away from the screen. Registered attendee, Monroe Foundation. For several seconds, I couldn't look away from the screen. I had imagined this conference 100 different ways. None of those versions included my family sitting in the audience. The morning of the keynote, I arrived early. The ballroom was already filling with nonprofit executives, board members, university leaders, and community organizations from across the country. As I waited backstage, one of the event coordinators clipped a microphone onto my jacket. "Nervous?" she asked. "A little." "That's a good sign." She smiled and pointed toward the stage. "They're ready for you." As I walked toward the podium, I caught a glimpse of the audience. Near the middle of the room, I saw them. Mom, Chloe, a few board members from the Monroe Foundation. For just a moment, our eyes met. Nobody waved. Nobody smiled. Then the lights shifted, and the moderator announced my name. The applause felt almost unreal. I took a slow breath and began. I've spent most of my career helping nonprofit organizations improve the way they operate. A few people nodded. But today, I don't want to talk about systems. I want to talk about people." The room became very quiet. The strongest organizations I've ever worked with all have one thing in common. They recognize the people whose names rarely appear on the stage. The person who catches the reporting mistake before an audit. The employee who remembers every donor's story. The staff member who quietly solves problems before anyone realizes there was one. If those people feel invisible long enough, the organization eventually becomes weaker, even if nobody notices right away. I wasn't speaking to my mother. I wasn't speaking to Chloe. I never mentioned my family. Everything I said came from years of experience working with dozens of organizations. Still, I could feel the weight of those words settling somewhere inside that room. When the presentation ended, people stood and applauded. Several attendees lined up afterward to introduce themselves. One director thanked me for reminding her to recognize her staff more often. Another admitted he'd never considered how much institutional knowledge could disappear when one person quietly carried everything. Those conversations meant more to me than the applause. As the crowd slowly dispersed, I noticed Mom standing several feet away. For the first time in years, she looked uncertain. She stepped closer. "You did well." "Thank you." There was an awkward silence. Chloe broke it first. "I didn't realize how much of that came from your own experience." I gave a small nod. It did. Mom looked like she wanted to say something else. Instead, she simply said, "Safe travels." Then they walked away. It wasn't a dramatic reunion. There were no tears, no public apology. Just three people who understood each other a little differently than they had that morning. A few weeks later, a small package arrived at my office. There was no return address. Inside was an old photograph. I recognized it immediately. I was 22 years old, sitting alone in the foundation office surrounded by stacks of grant applications. Someone must have taken it without me noticing. I turned the photo over. Mom's handwriting covered the back. I spent so much time building our family's name that I forgot who was actually building it. I read the sentence several times. Then I quietly set the picture on my desk. I didn't call her. Not that day. Some things aren't repaired by one letter. Some conversations need more than one apology. But for the first time, I wasn't carrying anger anymore. The acknowledgement came years later than I wished it had. Still, it was honest. Today, that photograph sits on a shelf in my office. Not as a reminder of what I lost, as a reminder of what I survived. People who meet me now usually know me because of my work. Not because I'm Evelyn Monroe's daughter. Not because I helped someone else build a reputation. They know me because I've spent years helping organizations become stronger without losing sight of the people behind them. And somehow, that's more than enough. If my story has taught me anything, it's that being dependable should never require becoming invisible. The people who quietly carry the weight deserve appreciation long before they're gone. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving someone wrong, it's finally recognizing your own value, even if others take years to see it. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your own experience in the comments, or tell me what part of this journey stayed with you the most. If you'd like to hear more real-life inspired family dramas like this one, don't forget to subscribe and join me for the next story. Until next time, thank you for listening, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.